The value of the running back position in the NFL has been severely depleted, and we talk about Saquon Barkley, Austin Ekeler, J.K. Dobbins, and so much more coming up next here on this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday. That means you have me, Kevin Oestreicher, one of our many NFL experts here on our network. We are free and available all podcasting platforms, including over in video form on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. We're a daily NFL podcast here on Locked On NFL, 5 days per week. So you can find us Monday through Friday. We'll be taking you through the biggest stories each and every weekday. And here today, I'm going to talk about running backs, and we're going to get into a lot of conversation with our hosts around our network about just how the value of the position in the NFL has been depleted. We'll talk first with Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants about Saquon Barkley, his holdout, and when that could end, if he's going to miss regular season games, is he going to be back for training camp? We'll talk about that with Patricia in the first segment. Then in the second segment, we'll move over and talk about Austin Ekeler with Daniel Wade, one of the hosts of Locked On Chargers. We'll talk about Ekeler's compromise with the team if he'll be back in 2024. Then at me being the host of Locked On Ravens, I'll take you through the final part of the show, talking about J.K. Dobbins, his potential hold-in with the team, and what it means moving forward for them. So without any further ado, let's first get into our conversation with Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants. Well, Saquon Barkley, the news regarding him, we continue to get a little bit of information, it seems, every week, every couple of weeks here to talk about the latest on his situation as Patricia Traina, the host at Locked On Giants. And Patricia, I know the value of running backs, what they're getting contractually, is at an all-time low right now. Saquon, one of the best running backs in the league. He was not at mandatory minicamp. Seems like this could go on into training camp. What's the latest you're hearing right now on the situation? And if you had to give a panic meter on a scale of 1 to 10, what would your number be right now?
I don't think anybody's panicking right now. They have until July 17th to work out a long-term deal. Saquon even said it, last weekend at his youth football camp that he was at. He said, look, it's not July 17th yet. So, really, if you're his agent, I know the fans want this done. Probably the media wants it done. But if you're the agent, you want to make sure that you're getting every last penny you can possibly get. And if you sign a deal now on June, 16th or whatever day it is, there's always going to be that doubt as to whether or not you left money on the table. So I do think, and this is a change for me because initially I didn't think they would get the two sides would get a deal done. But having heard Saquon speak, I feel differently now. I do think they will get a multi-year deal done. The holdup, from what I understand, is the guaranteed money and the structure of the contract. So, I've written about that. I've talked about that over on Locked On Giants, what needs to happen. But I do think that'll happen. Now, if it doesn't, for whatever the reason, I could see Saquon sitting out training camp and maybe coming in the last week or so before the regular season. Because, look, Saquon's probably not going to play in the preseason games anyway. So even if it comes to that, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I mean, at that point, Saquon has zero leverage left because the deadline will have passed. But, if he wants to make a point and say, okay, you know what, I'm not coming in, you can sit and sweat out when I'm going to come in, he could, I suppose. But I don't think he's going to. I'd be surprised if it comes to that, to be honest with you. I think they will get something done on or about the 17th. And, this we'll be able to sit back and laugh at this whole thing.
Right. In terms of that, Patricia, you think there's no chance he sits out any games in the regular season?
I don't see that happening either because, look, if he has to play on the franchise tag, what benefit is it going to be to him to sit out games? If you're wanting to get that big paycheck and your numbers drop because you decided to sit out games, what justification now do you have? He could say, oh, well, look at my past history. Well, in the NFL, it's a what have you done for me lately type of league. So, he'll be another year older. I just don't see how it would benefit him to sit out any games if he doesn't get a long-term deal done. Some people say, well, he could show the Giants because he is the offense. That may have been the case in the past, but the Giants have added some playmakers. They have Waller. They have, they added Paris Campbell. They added Jalen Hyatt. They drafted at the running back position, Eric Gray. They have Daniel Bellinger coming back, Darius Slayton coming back. They have options. This isn't a case anymore where Saquon is exclusively the offense like maybe he was a few years ago.
And I remember, Patricia, we talked on the show just a few weeks ago, right, when, Dexter Lawrence got his, and I asked you about Saquon in that segment. You gave me numbers, you gave me years, a whole layout of what you thought Saquon should be getting based off, let's just say, the past month. Has anything changed for you personally in terms of what you believe the deal should look like for Saquon?
Well, I think it's going to probably be a 3-year deal, possibly with a 4th year, which would be voidable, but an out after 2. That would be, to me, that would make the most sense. And you put all the, the guaranteed money and the heavy stuff in the front part of the contract. But, if the guaranteed money is the holdup, which I believe it is, it's got to be the equivalent of the sum of the franchise tag for this year and next year at running back, which I think it comes to about 23 or 24 million. And then if you go back and you look at what the Giants have been doing with Daniel Jones's contract, what they did with Dexter Lawrence's contract, they added an additional 15% on top of the sum of the franchise tag. So I think they'll probably take the same approach with Saquon. But, the question is now, how can they pump some more guaranteed money his way? Now, the answer is to maybe throw in some really ridiculously easy to attain incentives, not likely to be earned incentives, which of course would kick into the following year, but would give Saquon the financial security that he's looking to get.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll get more clarity on that as the coming weeks here before that July 17 deadline. But if there is a holdout into the regular season, Patricia, I know you said you don't expect anything like that. But if that's the case, what does the room look like behind Saquon? Who would get the carries and what would the room look like?
Well, Matt Breida is RB2 as of right now. I think they will probably expedite the carries for Eric Gray, their draft pick. It's a young man that they like. Gary Brightwell will probably get some snaps, and we'll see what happens with Deshaun Corbin. He was on the practice squad last year, so maybe he would get a bump up. Or they could also pick a running back up off the street. When cut down date comes around, if Saquon is still not here, they pick a guy up and they add him to the roster. So that's an option. And no, I don't think it'll be Dalvin Cook. I think by then Dalvin Cook will probably be signed someplace. But if he's not, I don't think it'll be him. And I don't think it'll be Zeke Elliott either. But, that's certainly an option for them.
Yeah, and I know that with Saquon, Patricia, he's a huge part of that offense, but not the only part. I think Daniel Jones was a huge pleasant surprise for so many in New York last year. So with Daniel Jones, Patricia, with the skill position players around him. So I know they made the trade for Darren Waller. They're expecting big things out of Daniel Bellinger. They have some wide receivers there as well. What does the offense look like outside of Saquon right now?
Yeah, I mean, versatility. They're going to be better able to play matchup football, I think. Daniel Jones can give them some carries. Paris Campbell can probably give them some carries. They're mixing and matching guys. We saw it all spring with alignments that we hadn't seen last year. Guys playing in the slot that never played in the slot before or rarely played in the slot. So, the whole thing is going to come down to that offensive line. Can that offensive line come together and be the blockers that they need them to be, both in pass protection and in run blocking? But they have options now. And, Mike Kafka must be sitting there at night, going over his film, going over the tape and just sitting there going, ooh, boy, I can't wait to get these guys on the field and unleash this, stream of options that people just haven't seen yet.
Big shout out to Patricia for hopping on talking Saquon Barkley with me, and for more on Patricia's work, be sure to check out the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Coming up in the second part of our show, we dive into more running back talk with Daniel Wade of Locked On Chargers, talking about Austin Ekeler's status with the team, both for this year and the future. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to get to on Locked On NFL. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in all the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. And look, me being the Ravens host, I'm a big Orioles guy. They've been exceeding expectations this year. Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson. The pitching needs some work, but if you want to bet Orioles props, maybe Orioles futures, get in on the action at FanDuel. Don't miss your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball trademarks, user permission. We are back here, our second segment of Locked On NFL Monday edition. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. Thank you again for tuning in and making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day. And for all the everydayers out there, I appreciate you tuning in to the show here and showing your support. But now we're going to continue our running back conversation. The Chargers and Austin Ekeler have been somewhat of a public feud about Ekeler's contract. They agreed to a compromise. We'll talk about what that was and what it means for Ekeler's future with the team. Coming up now with Daniel Wade of Locked On Chargers. But the Los Angeles Chargers and Austin Ekeler have a little bit of a compromise going on here. He shows up to mandatory minicamp. Here to talk about that with me and more Chargers is Daniel Wade, one of the hosts over at Locked On Chargers. And Dan, I know we talked a little while ago about Ekeler. Was he going to show up? What was this potential contract going to look like? The Chargers and Ekeler agreeing on a compromise. Did you expect something like this to happen where they give him more reachable incentives and he obviously now shows up in return for that?
Yeah, there is a little bit of a precedent for it under Tom Telesco. A few years ago, pass rusher Melvin Ingram was in the last year of his deal where nothing was guaranteed to him, had a hold-in during training camp, and they ended up finding a way to guarantee some of that money for him just to give him a little bit of security going into the season. I look at this in that same vein. I mean, they let Austin Ekeler go seek out a trade partner for the Chargers, right? But like we talked about the last time we got together, it was just always unlikely you were going to find a team willing to not only give away draft assets, but also give a double-digit annual average value contract to a running back who that contract would start in their 29 season, right? Age 29 season. When you have guys like Ezekiel Elliott right on the street at 27 and he's thought of as washed up. So it was just always going to be hard-pressed to think they were going to get something like that done, a trade that would make sense. But I do think this is something that keeps the distraction away, right? The Chargers have put a lot into this season, right? A lot of contract restructures. They're $60 million over the cap projected in 2024. A lot is riding on this year. He was such a big component for it. So I think it is something where $1.75 million in incentives, if he has the season he had last year, he basically hits all of those numbers that he would need to get all of those incentives. So I think it works out best for both sides.
Yeah, and I know Ekeler has been very outspoken about his contract situation, what he believes he's deserved, and obviously wants to be paid by Los Angeles or a situation that will pay him that. So with that in mind, Daniel, do you feel like this could be Ekeler's last hurrah in a Los Angeles Chargers uniform, or do you think there's hope that maybe the two sides could come to a new contract that Ekeler believes is worth his value?
It's such a good question because I think right now, if you're reading the temperature on it, obviously things have cooled down a little bit where it doesn't seem like there's a ton of hostility towards the organization right now. But I thought when he spoke with the media this past week, it was definitely a little bit more bittersweet than just the usual, all good energy that you get from Austin Ekeler, right? There was a lot of specific things he said. I have one more obligation here. I'm obligated to be here for one more season, right? You don't want guys talking about obligation, especially a guy who is such a central kind of vocal leader on this team. Like if you're talking about someone who brings energy on the daily, that is what Austin Ekeler brings. He is always that high energy, high output type of a guy and character. And I think that for him saying those things, I think for him to come back to the Chargers, I think he's always going to test his options unless the Chargers decide to franchise tag him in 2024. If he puts up a ridiculous season like he did last year, it's going to be tempting to do that because Isaiah Spiller, the Chargers' 2022 fourth-round pick, is the only running back on this team under contract after the 2023 season. So that room is going to get very thin, especially after potentially losing a guy that's done, what he has done, 38 touchdowns over the last couple of seasons. He also has over 1,600 all yards from scrimmage last year as well. So it's hard to imagine how they would replace him. But obviously the extension talks, they were far apart this year.
Yeah, and I know that the Chargers do have a plethora of talented skill position players there, Daniel. But do you feel like, Justin Herbert aside, Austin Ekeler is the most important piece on that offense?
For skill position players, I mean, he's up there. Like, it's hard, if you're comparing him with someone like Rashawn Slater, who's an all-pro left tackle, right? But if you're just talking about the skill position players on this team and what you have elsewhere in that room, right? Because that's important. If you're talking about Keenan Allen, we saw single-handedly how much it hurt the Chargers offense not to have Keenan Allen last year. Now you have Quentin Johnston, right? Does that soften the blow if he has to go out or miss a couple of games, right? Can you get by with having a first-round pick at that spot? Whereas behind Austin Ekeler, you have Josh Kelly, who had a little bit of a renaissance year last year, but ended up missing 4 games last year in his best season. And Isaiah Spiller, who had, 20 carries in his first year as a rookie. So it's almost, totally a question mark as far as what you're going to get from him this season. You better, if Isaiah Spiller, they have to hope he's going to show something this year, because if not, Austin Ekeler is going to have all the leverage when those negotiations come up, and they're not going to have a, really good answer to who could take over that mantle when he says, hey, who can do what I do? Nobody on this Chargers offense can do specifically what Austin Ekeler can do, and especially when you have a new offensive coordinator like Kellen Moore, I think he's absolutely one of the most important pieces to this offense.
Yeah, and one of the best running backs in the league still, so definitely deserves to get paid. How much we will see next year. But Daniel, let's bring Justin Herbert back into the picture. Speaking of extensions, he's eligible. Obviously, don't have to get it done tomorrow. There is still time. All hope is not lost if he doesn't get one before the year this year. But do you have any updated potential timelines? Any updated things you're hearing about maybe a Herbert extension? What that could look like and when it could get done?
There's been nothing out there, which makes me think it's coming and it's in the works, right? And that's how it kind of has always gone with the Chargers. When things get really quiet, that's usually when things are starting to happen. And I think that's what we're seeing here with Justin Herbert. If you look back at what Tom Telesco's history has looked like with this team, the number one thing you can kind of peg to his name, signing his star players. He does not let star players get away, right? He gave Keenan Allen a second and a third contract. Mike Williams just got a second contract. Derwin James was made the highest paid safety of all time. Joey Bosa was made the highest paid defensive player of all time. Tom Telesco doesn't let these kind of guys get away. The deal is going to get done, but if we're going by the timeline the Chargers usually use to sign their superstars, I think it's going to come a little bit closer to training camp. On the eve of training camp, I wouldn't be surprised if we see the deal get done. I would be very surprised if we don't see it get done this offseason.
All right, so something to monitor for the Chargers there. But Daniel, we had mandatory minicamp pass, obviously voluntary OTAs as well. There's a little bit of a break now, but was there anybody that you saw that you liked what you saw or heard about coming out of those two as we kind of gear up for training camp in a couple weeks?
Yeah, I think the guy who made the most waves at Chargers mandatory minicamp and OTAs was easily their first-round pick, Quentin Johnston. And I think it was a lot of people maybe realizing, oh, hey, this dude does have some really special traits. Once you see him out here on a field full of NFL athletes, the athleticism still stands out, right? And that's one thing you're not really sure, especially for a guy that size at 6'2", right? You saw him do it in college. You saw him break a bunch of tackles. But now when you're seeing him do the things he didn't do in college, I think you're just that much more encouraged. Like a ton of just crazy high-pointing catches over dudes. Toe tapping, things like that we didn't see a bunch from him. We didn't see the catch radius or at least him use it well enough because he does have really long arms. He is 6'2". He's an explosive leaper. Like all of those things are going, but he didn't look like Mike Williams catching the ball in the air in college. We're seeing that now, and if you're adding that to, already the special traits that he brings as far as just being a 6'2" wide receiver that has the explosiveness in and out of his breaks and the ability to break tackles as Quentin Johnston does, he has easily been the guy that's kind of made the most waves so far, just as far as, hey, this dude kind of looks like he fits the bill. He looks like he's a special type of athlete, and that was something you kind of needed to see him around other NFL athletes before you get a good read on it.
Daniel providing the insight on the Chargers and Austin Ekeler. And for more on Daniel's work, be sure to check out that Locked On Chargers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up in the final part of our show, I'll be taking it through the J.K. Dobbins situation and his potential holding that's going on right now with the team. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on Locked On NFL. We are back rounding out Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. I am the host of Locked On Ravens here. So I'll be taking you through some J.K. Dobbins talk. Now, we talked about Saquon Barkley, talked about Austin Ekeler. Obviously, Josh Jacobs got franchise tagged as well. There's a situation going on with him. The position, just the running back position in general, has been so depleted of its value over recent seasons, where I remember personally when Mark Ingram signed with the Ravens back in 2019, had his 15 touchdown season, then 10 rushing, 5 receiving. He was a guy that, what's the age limit for running backs where we really start to say, that's too old. Used to be 30. I think a lot of people talked about, once a running back hits 30, they're done, cut bait, that's it. But that age seems to have decreased. It's now 29, 28, 27, right? Dalvin Cook is a player who is nowhere near 30 and is, mid to late 20s right now. And he just got cut by the Vikings. So the position in general is just at an all-time low. And J.K. Dobbins for the Ravens is a player that when he has been healthy is the key. He's been one of the better running backs in the league. Now, the issue for him is he's only played in 23 games in 3 NFL seasons. He's now entering his last year of his rookie deal, was a second-round pick back in 2020. He's only had one career game over 15 carries, so he hasn't necessarily had the workload to maybe these bell cow guys have. And look, bell cow in today's NFL, that bell cow role, it's kind of going away. We don't really see as much bell cow anymore. I mean, the Ravens have Gus Edwards, right? They use J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards in tandem. But for Dobbins, the story for him is that he put a couple of cryptic tweets out a couple weeks ago and showed up to mandatory minicamp, but did not participate. John Harbaugh was asked about that and seemed pretty disappointed, gave a pretty brief answer. And usually when John Harbaugh does this, just speaking from experience, it usually means like he is not happy with the player. Not all the time, but usually. Like Ben Mason, for example, when the Ravens cut him and he ended up signing with the Patriots practice squad, John Harbaugh was very, very upset. And, you could tell in his answer that he was not happy with the decision that Ben Mason made and stuff like that. Well, J.K. Dobbins seems like John Harbaugh is not happy with his decision to not practice. He expected J.K. Dobbins to practice. He did not. So to me, it signals a holding. Ian Rappaport on a local show here in Baltimore said that he, anticipates that this is a holding. Didn't confirm anything. J.K. Dobbins talked with a local station here and talked about the business side not being all daisies and roses and sunshine and in reference to the Lamar situation. So to me, it does smell like a holding. Didn't confirm it word for word, but seems like that's what's going on. They said that there was some minor injury. J.K. Dobbins didn't comment on that injury. We don't really know what that injury is, if it's real or not. Dobbins has had his fair share of injuries, dating back to the 2020 season. But to me, this holding situation is such an interesting one because there are two different angles of this. One, and I talked about this with Kadri Ismail on my show on Friday for Locked On Ravens, is for Dobbins, just how long does he want to go with this if it is a holding? Was this just a mandatory minicamp statement where he said, you know what, I'm going to just do this for minicamp, come back in training camp, everything's going to be fine, and dandy will move forward? Or is this more than just a minicamp statement, and he holds out for part of training camp, for all of training camp, for the regular season? And, we see now it's the hold-ins, where you used to see the holdouts. Guys wouldn't even report. They'd get fined. Now guys are reporting, so they won't necessarily get fined, but then they're not doing anything in practice. So for me, if I had to make a prediction, I would anticipate Dobbins is back for training camp. The other aspect of this is the value for J.K. Dobbins right now was not at its highest peak, in my opinion. Dobbins, again, missed all the 2020 season with his knee injury, came back in 2021, had to undergo a cleanup procedure. And when he was on the field for Baltimore, again, didn't look like his full 100% self. That wasn't surprising to a lot of people. But I just feel like his value isn't as high as it could be. Like, let's say he has a great 2023 season, plays all 17 games, puts some health questions to bed and enters free agency with the opportunity to maybe get a lot more money than he would if he signed the long-term deal right now, tomorrow, next week, whatever it may be. And I understand that you want long-term security here if you're J.K. Dobbins. All NFL players do. The league for players can come and go with a snap of the finger, right? Injuries can happen, fall out of favor, you stop producing, right? It's all those types of things. Anything can contribute to either a make or break season, make or break game, make or break play for any of these guys. But to me, I think that if Dobbins signed a long-term deal, he, one, wouldn't be getting the money that I think he deserves and that he thinks he deserves. And two, if he plays really well and his value goes up, that's an you signed the deal back then. You can't redo it now. And then I think that would make him upset because he wasn't maximizing his value. So I think this was more of a statement for Dobbins where, again, he might not have liked the initial offers the Ravens were coming in with him at. Maybe this is a situation where he was trying to send some sort of message. But to me, I'm not overly concerned right now. I think if this continued into training camp, that's when I become concerned. It would have been the same thing with a lot of these other guys too. Like if Lamar Jackson still didn't sign, that would have been an issue. If these guys don't report to training camp, that's where I kind of draw the line. So we'll see what happens with Dobbins. I don't anticipate anything, but Dobbins is a bright young runner. He's someone who has improved when he's on the field, but he has to put some questions about his health to bed. We know what he can do when he's healthy. There's no doubt about it. But to me, I'm interested to see how Dobbins can perform this year in a new offense with Todd Monken, where, again, workload was kind of an issue for him. He expressed disappointment and frustration after the Ravens game against Cincinnati in the wild card round, saying that he should have been the guy. They move on from Greg Roman. They bring Todd Monken in. They're expected to throw the ball a lot more after adding Odell Beckham Jr., after adding Zay Flowers. Lamar's expected to have the keys of the offense. So what does Dobbins' workload look like? Is he happy with the offense's direction? We'll see all that in the coming weeks, coming months, and obviously the coming year here for the Ravens in the 2023 season. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On NFL. Thank you so much for tuning in with us today. We're going to get back here tomorrow, more NFL content with your Tuesday hosts. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On NFL.